Hi, I'm James LaVeck, and this is Life After Losses, where I share reflections on what it means to live with loss, and just as importantly, how we live beyond it. And this is entry 271, what you've outgrown. Now, last week we talked about the cost of always being the strong one. This week, I want to talk about something that often follows strength, the tension of growth. Not dramatic change, not crisis, but that friction you feel when something that once fit doesn't anymore. Let's talk about what happens when you realize you've outgrown parts of yourself and what that means for renewed purpose. Growth brings its own form of tension. It's not dramatic, it's not loud, it's not the kind of crisis that forces immediate action. It's more subtle than that. It feels like friction. Something that used to fit doesn't anymore, and you can't ignore it. We talk a lot about becoming. We talk less about outgrowing, but growth always requires both. We don't just add new layers, we shed old ones, and shedding can feel disloyal. There are roles that once made sense, and these are versions of you that were necessary. The strong one, the fixer, the peacemaker, the survivor, the one who held it together. Yeah, some of those identities were forged in grief, and some were shaped long before loss ever entered the picture. They helped you endure. They helped you stabilize. They helped you navigate parts of your life that required everything you had. But here's the truth that doesn't get said much, often enough. A role can save you in one moment and limit you in the next. What once protected you can eventually confine you. Remember the cage we talked about last week? There are beliefs that expire without fanfare. And sometimes it's not just a role that changes. Sometimes it's a belief. I have to be the strong one. I can't disappoint anyone. I shouldn't want more. This is just who I am. Those beliefs may have once served a purpose. Maybe they kept you functional when everything felt unstable. Maybe they kept relationships intact. Maybe they gave you structure when grief dissolved everything else. But growth has a way of exposing what no longer aligns or fits. You start noticing discomfort where there used to be certainty. You start questioning narratives that once felt permanent. And that questioning can feel unsettling, even wrong. Because if something carried you through survival, letting it go can feel like a betrayal. Sometimes what carries you through survival is simply a tool preparing you for the next step. Grief reshapes identity. There's no way around that. You became a widow. You, the bereaved parent, the sibling who survived, the one who knows loss. And for a while, that identity makes sense. It explains your energy, it explains your boundaries, it explains your focus. But what happens when grief is no longer the loudest thing in the room? What happens when you're not just surviving? Sometimes what creates tension isn't the pain, but the realization that you've outgrown the version of yourself that pain required. Not because that version was wrong, but because it was temporary. You're allowed to honor who you were in a temporary identity without remaining who you were. Now, there's another layer to this that we should be aware of. Other people get used to your roles. They rely on your steadiness. They expect your adaptability. They assume your perspective. And when you start shifting, even by tiny fractions, it can create ripple effects. Growth is rarely disruptive because you changed. It's disruptive because others must recalibrate too, just as you had to recalibrate yourself. Now, if you've always been the capable one, stepping back feels risky. If you've always been the resilient one, expressing uncertainty feels foreign. If you've always been the one who adapts, staying rooted feels almost rebellious. But you cannot cultivate renewed purpose in a space where expired expectations are still in control. Outdated expectations need to be shed and reset, because shedding isn't failure. Outgrowing something doesn't mean it was a mistake. It means it's had its time. You don't shame winter when spring arrives. You don't resent no longer being a student after you've graduated. You don't keep scaffolding in place once a building stands. You acknowledge it did its job. Then you remove it. There are parts of you that were built for survival. There are beliefs that were built for stability. There are identities that were built for protection. And now, some of them may be too small. That tension you feel, It may not be confusion. It may be expansion expressing against old walls. So here's what I'm sitting with right now, and what I'll offer you to think about this week. What have you outgrown? Not what you're fixing, not what you're enduring, not what you're surviving. What no longer fits? Is it a belief about who you are, a role that's been playing out of habit, an expectation someone else placed on you, an identity formed in crisis that no longer defines this part of your life? You can't simply step into a renewed purpose and still clinging to expired versions of yourself. They served you, they mattered, they got you here, but they may not be what carries you forward. Growth isn't just about adding something new. Sometimes it's about the courage to let go of what once kept you safe, and trusting that who you are becoming doesn't need every old version of you to survive. That may actually be worth paying attention to. Thanks for watching.